When it comes to artificial intelligence, people are either excited or afraid. In fact, a little bit of both. So what I want to do in this video is provide a different perspective so we can reduce these extremes and have a clearer view on what to do moving forward in the future. I would like to start with an analogy. If you've grown up in the United States and Canada, you probably are aware of Paul Bunyan and John Henry. These stories come from the late 1800s. In case you don't know, Paul Bunyan was a lumberjack that was way above everybody else, and at one point he had to compete against a machine to prove that humans were better than machines. He ended up losing by a very small margin, but still lost, and of course machines moved forward and were the technology adopted. Similarly, John Henry was working in the railroad and was above and beyond everybody else, and had to compete also against a machine. He ended up winning, but with the amount of effort given, he died. So these are just stories, but they illustrate the difference between tradition and status quo compared to technological progress. The thing is, if you do not change, you can become extinct. This comes from a book called Who Moved My Cheese, and I put a reference to that book in the description of the video. Being extinct is maybe a little extreme, but at least you can become obsolete. We need to adapt to new technologies, and AI is just a new technology that is there, and we need to adapt, figure out how to use that tool to move forward. The thing is, in technology, there's a lot of hype, and that hype is also there with AI. So let me give you some examples of hype that happened over the years. So the first one I want to look at is client-server. Back in the 80s or early 90s, people were using terminals to access a centralized machine and were doing their work that way. Then came out the client-server approach, and the press, actually the trade magazines, were always talking about client-server, despite the fact that for years, companies would not buy computers, would not buy these clients, because they didn't really have any reason to do it. It was a lot more expensive and provided very little in terms of advantages. So that's one example of the fact that the technology was hyped for a long time before finally a proper application came up so people could take advantage of it and really use it to make the computer environment better. Another example of that is object-oriented programming. When object-oriented programming came out, all of a sudden everybody said, this is the future, everybody should go with object orientation. And in fact, this is mostly what happened. Most of the languages today use object orientation. However, at that time, some people made even statements saying that with objects, you won't need programmers anymore. That was, of course, totally false because you needed actually better programmers. I've seen situations where a large company decided to go with object orientation, and they wrote their software using object-oriented languages. But because the people involved did not really know what that meant to use objects, they continued programming the same way they did before, but using objects, which simply made the code even less efficient. And a lot of large projects had spectacular failures in the early days of object orientation. So we have to keep in mind that we have that human nature that needs to adapt to new technologies to be able to take advantage of it. The final example I want to give before moving into artificial intelligence is when web browsers came out. When that came out, that was a new approach. Basically, in some ways, it was a big step backward because the browsers could not do much outside of displaying a page. So in a way that was going back to the terminals and leaving behind the client-server approach. And there was also a lot of hype that happened at that point because it was very nice to be able to see that page pop up, have some fields that you fill out and then submit your form, etc. And some people were making some statements like, you can now write applications in hours instead of having to spend months. Of course, that was false. It was true in some cases, but it was not the right approach for most applications. And then the technology had to evolve a lot to move away from the HTTP protocol or being able to work around the issues with the HTTP protocol. So let's get back into artificial intelligence and the fact that we've always had a lot of hype around that because it stimulates the imagination. Way back in 1966, somebody came out with a small program called Eliza that was a psychotherapist. I remember reading that some people that tried it at the time asked for the other people to leave the room to have privacy. So that Eliza was a nice chatbot to be able to discuss your problems, and you felt like you were talking to a real person. Interestingly enough, that was back in '66, Eliza won a 2021 Legacy Peabody Award, and in 2023 there was a study done, and apparently Eliza was able to beat GPT 3.5 in a Turing test study. And so that tells you that even technologies from way back then was enough to really impress a lot of people and give the impression that computers were here to replace us. So if we move into other areas of artificial intelligence, we can see that we've always had the idea of having humans competing against machine. So if you look back in 1996, 1997, you had this poster here, Garry Kasparov against IBM DeepBlue. And the idea was that, will the machine be able to beat our world champion? And in fact, at the end of the day, just like in the case of Paul Bunyan, the machine won against a human. And of course, at that point, it always gave the impression that says, well, that means that soon artificial intelligence will be there to take our place. That did not happen. That was back in '97. We're in 2025. Another example is in 2016, where AlphaGo was able to beat Lee Sedol, the world champion at Go, and beat him in a very definitive manner. And so once again, we had the world champion representing the human race against a machine, and the machine won. But these are games, and they don't necessarily generalize as well. The example that we have that does a generalization is really the case where IBM Watson was able to go against the Jeopardy champions and be able to beat them at their own game. We have to still put this stuff in context, because the big leap here was the fact that IBM Watson was able to take a question and figure out the right context to be able to search and retrieve the information and beat the champions that way. So the question at the end of all this, now that we've had back in 2011, the IBM Watson beating the Jeopardy champions in a more general type intelligence, and now we have all these large language model and generative AI, the question is, are we doomed? Well, there are still game shows. People are still playing chess. People are still playing Go, and Jeopardy is still on TV. But now, with AI, people are able to use the technology in creative ways to help them achieve their goals faster. Is the technology perfect? No, it's not. And there are a lot of issues there, as we'll see in a couple of minutes. But the point is that we need to know about the technology. Here's another quote from Who Moved My Cheese. What you are afraid of is never as bad as what you imagine. So we really need to get familiar with artificial intelligence and get to know these tools, because at the end of the day, these are tools to make our lives easier. And just like any tools, you need to be able to learn how to use them to be able to use them efficiently and then be able to improve your lives. So where are we at with artificial intelligence? Here's something that may be able to guide us a little bit. Here's a bell curve or market adoption. This comes from a book called Crossing the Chasm, and I also put a reference to that book in the description of the video. And what it shows here is technology comes out, and you can look at web technology, you can look at communication technology. It takes time to get to a point where people really want to use it, figure out a way to use it in an efficient manner that is beneficial to them. And so you have these technology enthusiasts in the early market and the visionaries that are willing to put the effort in to try to use all that technology. And because this is where the excitement is, all the trade magazine and all the articles will talk about that. So it's a very, very noisy group that actually represents a very small percentage of the population of people that are using the technology. And then eventually it needs to be able to cross that chasm here that represent the difference between having experts that are able to use the technology and move into a field where people don't need to be experts and the technology become easier to use, and eventually gets to a point where that technology become almost invisible and just makes our lives easier. Because technology that is invisible is the best technology because we simply use it, it does what we want, it helps us, and we don't have to worry about anything else. Where in the early days, you really have to know about the technology, you need to know the details. So where are we at with artificial intelligence? In my opinion, it depends which industry you're in. In some industries, you already have artificial intelligence being injected into some products that allows you to do more things with those products. Look at Adobe that has all the things you can do with pictures, and even just on your phone, the fact that you can extract the picture in the forefront and remove the background. And so some of that technology is there, but that's not something that can replace humans. It's simply, again, a tool that makes our lives easier. In some other industries, it gets injected more and more. And for us, where the fear is with all these generative AI chatbots, where we think they could eventually replace us. I don't think we're there yet. I think we can be somewhat still in the early adopters and also maybe in the early majority. But even in the early majority, you have more than 50% of the people that are not using it. And AI has some issues that will need to be worked on, just like with other technologies. It needs to be able to evolve and may change completely to get to a point where we can really do what we imagine it can be done with the technology. So here are some examples. You have AI chatbots that outperform doctors in diagnosing patients. That was found in a study, and that article comes from February 13, 2025. Well, if you look at what's needed to diagnose a patient, you need to look at a bunch of symptoms and then do searches to find out what can apply and what's the most relevant. So you apply some statistics on all the symptoms and all the things that can have those symptoms, and with statistics you can get to a diagnosis. But that's still searching a database, and that's something that computers are really good at, and doctors don't need to then remember everything. So they can use AI chatbots to help themselves get to better diagnosis, and then use their expertise and experience to figure out what's the best approach to get to a final solution. I mentioned a minute ago that generative AI still has some issues. So here's another article that says AI hallucinations can't be stopped. Yeah, you can limit them, but they cannot be stopped. So that means they need supervision, and in fact, that doesn't mean that they can provide a proper answer. It's just a bunch of information that's been synthesized into a model that allows you to generate the next token and the next token to get to an answer. And so they don't really have a proper view of the world with that, and so there will be some changes in the future that will make it better. Here's another example talking about generative AI, where a French AI chatbot was taken offline after wild answers led to online ridicule. I believe this was the case where the AI suggested replacing chicken eggs with cow eggs. And so you can see that it just shows that errors happen and it still needs a lot of supervision, but we're not at a point where we can let them do things for us. They're still just a tool that we use, and we need to verify what can be done with it and what answers we're getting. So what should we do moving forward? We know that the market adoption is still in the early days in most areas, and we need to get familiar with it, otherwise we'll be left behind. And for anybody in any area of their lives, may that be in their personal lives or at work or at play, there would be ways where AI could make life easier and allow them to enjoy life better. So what we need to do is take actions. And when I say take actions, it's basically start using AI, whatever you have available. And there are a lot of free tools that you can try, and I'll talk about some of those in future videos. But for the moment, think about if you're a student, I encourage you to use AI. Use AI to do some research, to find some answers, and verify that these answers are valid. Use AI to help you maybe rewrite part of something you're writing because you're not pleased with the way it is, and so you ask AI to rewrite it. That may give you an idea how to rewrite it yourself in a better way. If you're in the workforce, same type of thing, writing email, writing Slack messages, even generating code snippets is a good approach to use AI. Then you find new ways to use AI to find out how you can become more efficient. If you're a retiree, use AI to read text for you instead of you having to read the text. So that's a simple thing that can be done, something that's been around for quite a while, and it's usually available for free on your computer. You can also, if you have to write email, same thing, you use AI to help you there. You use AI to help you do searches. So these are just a few simple ideas how to start applying AI to your daily life so you can get more familiar with what it can do and where it's maybe not so great and maybe a little weak, and look at the strong points, figure out how to make it better for you, but be aware of the weaknesses so you don't apply AI everywhere. One thing to keep in mind, though, is Microsoft did a study that relying on AI kills your critical thinking skills. So it's very, very important that if you use AI, you stay active with it. Just like I said a minute ago, you need to be able to use AI, look at the results, evaluate those results, figure out if they're valid or not, figure out if they're good enough, and then adapt them to what you want to do. And so always stay in charge, always keep in mind that AI is a tool for you, and keep using that tool. So please give me your comments about what you think about this video. Hopefully this is helpful, and please subscribe to my channel.